In this video, I'll show you how to set up a quick and easy Bendy Bones rig to create animations in the style of shows like Adventure Time or those classic rubber hose cartoons. We'll take this character drawn in Inkscape, export it properly, and rig it in Blender step by step. The idea is to make something simple, clear, and easy to revisit later as a reference. This is going to be a simple but complete rig. We are not doing facial animation or hands here. This is all about getting you up and running with a solid Bendy Bones setup in 10 minutes or less. If you watched my previous video where I rigged a simple eye case setup, this one is meant to complement that. I'll leave you a link in the description. Before we jump in, a quick note. If you're interested in learning how to actually draw the characters you can animate, consider liking the video and subscribing. I got a ton of step-by-step tutorials on character design, backgrounds, game art, and more, all done entirely in Inkscape. And if you stick around until the end, I got something special to share if you really want to master Inkscape. Let's start in Inkscape. Here I have a simple Adventure Time inspired character, and everything that needs to move in Blender has already been separated into groups. If I go to Object, Layers and Objects, you'll see that I took the time to group and rename everything. Also notice that there are no layers. This is a nice trick. If you delete all layers and leave all objects unassigned, Blender will automatically create a layer for every object or group when you import the SVG. That saves you from having to manually recreate layers in Blender. Now here's another important trick. If you left-click any object and open the object properties, you'll see both a label and an ID input. The label is the name you gave the object, but the ID doesn't have the correct name. You can copy the label name into the ID field and then click Set. Blender will use that name for the layers. This small step will save you a massive amount of time later, and it's really useful when you're weight painting, so it's absolutely worth doing. And we're ready to move into Blender. In Blender, I always recommend starting with the 2D animation workspace. It already has a lot of useful things set up for us. By default, Blender creates a grease pencil object. You can go ahead and delete it. We're going to import our SVG instead, which will create a new grease pencil object automatically. To do that, go to File, Import SVG as grease pencil. If everything went correctly, you should see your character appear, along with all the layers correctly named in the dope sheet. Now let's create the bones. In Object mode, go to Add, Armature. Then immediately switch to Edit mode. For the torso, you can use one or more bones. I'll use two, one for the lower torso and one for the upper torso, so we get a bit more flexibility. Move the head of the first bone down to the lower torso. Then extrude upward using the E key for the upper torso, and extrude once more for the head. Now for the actual bendy bones. This setup requires a few extra bones to work properly, so pay attention here. Each bendy limb will use two contour handles, one at the top and one at the bottom. Go to Add Bone and place a small bone near the top of the arm. This will be the upper handle. Make it short. Then extrude a longer bone that covers the entire arm. This is the bendy bone itself. Extrude again to create a lower handle, and once more for the hand. Now this is important. Select the lower handle and clear its parents by going to Armature, Parent, Clear Parent. The hand should remain connected to the handle. And yes, this setup looks a bit strange, but it's necessary for the constraints we'll add in a moment. Repeat this process for each limb. Since the arms and legs are identical in setup, you could just duplicate the chain of bones using Shift-T and reposition them. Once that's done, I strongly recommend you to rename every bone. This step is super important. In Edit mode, go to the Bone Properties tab and give each bone a name that matches the location it should control. Also use left and right prefixes or suffixes so you can clearly identify each side. This will make weight painting much easier later, so don't skip it. Before continuing, let's make the rig easier to work with. In the armature's object data properties, Enable in front, so the bones are always visible. Then set display as to B-bone. This is important, otherwise you will not be able to see the bones bending. By default, bendy bones are way too thick. Luckily we can fix that. Stay in edit mode, select all bones, you can use the shortcut A, and go to Armature, Transform, Scale B-bone. Scale them down until they are easier to see. This doesn't affect functionality, only visibility. Now let's properly set the bendy bones. Select the middle bone of the arm, the actual bendy bone, and go to Bone Properties. Under Bendy Bones, set the segment to around 10. Then under Start Handle, set it to Absolute and use the eyedropper to select the upper handle bone. Do the same for the end handle, set it to Absolute and sample the lower handle bone. At this point the bendy behavior works, it is usable if you want, but we can make it much nicer to control. Switch to Pose Mode, select the bendy bone, and add a Stretch to constraint. Set the target to the armature and the bone to the lower handle. Now you can move the lower handle to position the arm. You can rotate the upper handle for shoulder motion and rotate the lower handle for wrist motion. If you think about it, it kinda behaves a bit like an IK setup, where you control where the hand goes, only that now you have to adjust the rotation as well. Now select the upper handle and shift-click the upper torso bone, Ctrl P, keep offset. Repeat this setup for the other limbs. You could just duplicate this limb and rename and reparent the bones. That's up to you. I think it's good practice to redo the same thing over and over again when you're starting out. It helps remembering it. And we got a functional rig. Test it to make sure everything works as you'd like it before moving on. The next step is binding the rig to the character. First, there are some bones that do not need vertex groups created. If you don't know what a vertex group is, for now go one by one through all the handle bones and under Bone Properties, tick off the form. Moving on, select the grease pencil object, then the armature, and go to Object, Parent, Armature Deform, with empty groups. Now it's time to paint the weight so Blender knows which bone will move which part. Switch the grease pencil object to weight paint mode. Use the vertex groups drop-down here at the top to select the group that belongs to the matching bone. That's why giving the bones a descriptive name earlier was so important. And then paint the corresponding strokes with full weight. If you have the strokes organized into layers like I do, you can make use of the layers drop-down right next to the vertex groups to lock any stroke that should be painted. This will make weight painting a breeze, since you won't have to worry about painting the wrong area. A quick tip, use this arrow at the side to enable auto-lock inactive layers, so only the active layers is editable. Really useful if you have a ton of layers. Once everything is painted correctly, you should have a fully working rig. At this point, we could stop here. We already have a functional Bendy Bones rig that's flexible, easy to animate, and easy to expand. But I want to push it a bit further and make it even easier to use, so it feels more like a proper rig with clear controls. The next part is optional and slightly more advanced. I'll still go step by step, but keep that in mind. We'll start by improving the way the legs work. Right now, to pose a leg, we need to move the lower handle and rotate with the upper and lower handles to get the bend we want. That works, but leg motion is usually simpler than arm motion, so we can make this easier by adding a couple of extra bones. In edit mode, create 2 new bones for the legs and place them sideways so they are easier to grab. One bone goes on top of the leg, roughly at about halfway point. The other goes a bit to the side. If needed, adjust their size using Armature, Transform, Scale B-bone. Now switch to Pose mode. Select the bone on top of the leg, Go to the Bone Properties tab and add a copy location constraint. Set the target to the armature and sample the bone that's off to the side. Enable offset and move the bone back so it sits over the leg again. One last thing, set the target and owner dropdown to pose space. You'll see why later. Next, select the bone on the side and add another copy location constraint. Set the target to the armature and sample the lower handle of the leg. Enable offset and set target and owner to pose space. Now select the top handle of the leg and add a locked track constraint. Sample the bone on top of the leg. Then select the bone handle and add another locked track constraint. For this one, use the negative Y axis, so it points correctly. And that's it. If you move the bone that's farther away from the leg, you'll see what this setup does. The lock track constraint forces both handles to always point to the bone on top of the leg, which automates the leg bend. Instead of rotating two handles, now you control the bend with a single bone, which is faster and more comfortable in my opinion. The offset bone is there on purpose. It uses a copy location constraint, so we are not directly moving the bone on top of the leg. This avoids some instability that can happen at certain positions. Repeat the same setup for the other leg, and if you want you can repeat this for the arms, though I find the arms can go for a more fine manual control. Now that we are done with the transformation bones, let's organize the rig using bone collections. Bone collections work like layers, but for bones. They make it easier to hide parts of the rig while animating. Select the armature and go to Object Data Properties. In Bone Collections, rename the default collection to something like Transformation Bones. Then click the plus button to create a new collection and name it something like Control Bones. Because this is a simple rig, most bones will act as control bones. Switch to Edit mode, select all bones, and move them to the Control Bones collection using Armature. Move to Bone Collection, or you can use the M shortcut as well. Then select the Bendy Bones and the bones on top of the legs and move them back into the Transformation Bones collection. You can check if everything is alright by toggling the eye icons. You could also color code at least one of the leg bones so you don't confuse the controls as you're animating. Select the control bone from one of the legs and go to Bone Properties, Viewport Display, Bone Color. Here you got a ton of colors to pick from. As a final step, you can add a root bone to move and scale the entire character at once. In Edit mode, add a new bone and place it below the character. Then shift select the lower torso bone, the lower handles of both arms and legs, and finally the new root bone. Parent everything to the root bone using Ctrl P and keep offset. Now you can move and scale the entire character without affecting the pose. You can also move this bone into the Control Bones collection. And that's it. You now have a flexible, beginner-friendly Bendy Bones rig that's easy to animate and easy to expand later. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you thought in the comments. All interactions helps the channel. And if you want to seriously learn illustration in Inkscape, I have a bundle of 13 full courses, over 70 hours of content, covering character design, background design, game art, and more. Perfect for illustrating in Inkscape and bringing it to animate in Blender. It's the best way to help the channel and help me making more of these free tutorials. So thank you for watching, I hope you learned something useful, or at least had fun, and I'll see you next week. Bye!